Okay, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And today is our section, I think our eighth section on the history of Greco-Roman philosophy. And then we just finished the essence, okay, Plato, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, we just finished. And today we are going back to the pre-Socratic philosophy. So that's we are doing today. And I call it Ionian school, actually include Milesians and Ionian. Basically, that's in the same area. So technically, I should start from this school because in Bertrand Russell's history of Western philosophy, he starts from Milesian school. Actually, it's the early school, but I think they would be too boring if we start from here. So I decided to start from Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And when we finish all these key, then we go from the pre-Socratic philosophy. That's the plan. And then
in theory in which the people of the Sindhu River came.
Okay, so that's the philosophers I try to cover. Okay, from Thales, Anaximander, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and the blue ones we already covered. And then today I face a different challenge compared to last 7 weeks. Last 7 weeks, basics, Plato and Aristotle, only 2 persons, they wrote a lot of books. So I have to spend 7 weeks to go over. And unfortunately, today we try to cover a few, probably 3, 4, 5 philosophers, and they don't have, they only a fragment. So most of the information is from secondary sources. So that's the problem, okay? But just go a quick overview on what the area we try to cover, and we already done on the Greek essence. And today we, in the pre-Socratic philosophy, we will basically, there's a 2 sides. One side is on the Asia Minor, that's on this side. And the other side is on the southern Italy, on this area. So basics, the known, that time the Greek word is around this area, right? From here to here, that's the Greek word. Greek has a colony on southern Italian and this area. So we will go from this area today. So that's the book we try to cover. Okay, so all this one, I will assume I already covered because I go through, I think it's all the books, okay. And today I try to cover the fragment from Thales and the Heraclitus. Okay, so that's what we try to do today. So today we will do the Ionian school. Okay, so Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Anaxagoras. Okay, so that's the 4 major philosophies I try to cover, but I'm not sure we have time to cover Anaxagoras or not, because if we don't have time, we probably can leave for next week. And the next week we are going to do move to the southern Italian side. So we are going to deal with Parmenides, Zenos, and Empedocles. So, and then the week after, we are going back to Greece, which is Democritus and Epicurus, which one is on the northern Greek, I think it's Democritus, okay, and then Epicurus is Asia Minor. So that's the plan, and then so that's begin for our pre-Socratic philosophers. So let's look at the map. So that's the Greek philosophers. I'm this here from Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. These 3 are all from Miletus. Okay, so Miletus is this area. So that's the beginning of so-called Western philosophy. And then we are going to move from Pythagoras. Pythagoras is from Samos here in this area, but it's difficult to categorize Pythagoras because eventually he moved to Croton in this area. So I probably will deal more on Pythagoras next week because he was born here and have his philosophy, but eventually set up his philosophy group school in this area. And another person is the so-called Xenophanes. Okay, Xenophanes, also from this area, from I don't have the name here, but from the Croton, but eventually he moved to Syracuse, okay, in the Sicily island here. So these two persons are more on the religious, mystical side. And we will spend time to deal with Heraclitus today. He also on this side, and Anaxagoras. Okay, so they all on this side. So that's the philosophy and the philosophers. For this week and the next week, we are going to deal. And Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are all covered soon, all covered. So that's what we are going to do at this moment. So before we move on to the Ionian philosophers, is there any question or any concern or something you have your own idea you want to share?
If you guys raise your hands, I can. Okay, sorry, Edward, I got you.
Edward, please. Yeah.
Edward, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you for organizing this, Jason. It's very impressive and helpful. And just looking at the last list, I wonder, do we know whether Heraclitus, who we're going to talk about today, had any interaction with Anaximander at all? That is either personal contact, student teacher. Certainly he would have been aware of what Anaximander said, but just looking at the dates that you set out there, Heraclitus and Anaximander would have been more or less contemporary. So maybe Dan knows, or someone else on the line knows about that. And let's listen now.
Dan, you want answer the question? Oh.
Well, I think one thing we can say is that Heraclitus talks a lot about the people he disagrees with.
Yeah.
And so, unlike some other people who might be either polite or have a different style of philosophy, he badmouths the people he's unhappy with. And that includes Pythagoras several times. He has some unkind things to say about Xenophanes also. And Hesiod, Homer, etc. The one thing, though, I think you can say is he doesn't actually attack any of the Milesian philosophers, and that's probably significant because if he didn't like them, he would have said so. So I think he's at least respects them. I'll put it that way. Whereas there's some other ones he doesn't seem to respect, and he thinks they're idiots and whatever. And he says that pretty openly and outspokenly.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Yeah, actually, I think we will read some of Heraclitus' phrases, or we want to points, and then you will see how he badmouths other philosophers. And actually, you are right. Basically, they are contemporary. If you consider Heraclitus, Anaxagoras, Parmenides, if you talk about with Socrates, that's contemporary. And Anaxagoras is, I think he's 30 years older than Socrates. And then there's no record. met or not. But for sure, Socrates know Anaxagoras, and he mentioned about him. They probably face the same fate, in Athens.
Can I add something, Jason?
Yeah, please, Greg.
I was reading Diogenes Laertius, and he said that Socrates studied with Anaxagoras.
Really?
Yep.
Because I see some information. They said there's no record they met each other, but at least, yeah.
Can I comment on that?
Laertius is not very reliable, so he tells a lot of anecdotes. So it's not like a lot of things, and he also made mistakes. But at least I know that he said that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So can I comment on that?
Yeah,
I think in metaphysics, in the book 1 of metaphysics, when Aristotle's going over the history of philosophy, he mentions how Socrates was busying himself with definitions, and how Plato portrays Socrates as, and Plato was affected by Heraclitus and Parmenides back and forth. So I don't know if that connects to Greg. But the question I do have is, did any of these guys ever talk about anthropomorphic language? I know Plato banned anthropomorphic language. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think Anaximander of Miletus had a problem with poets and in portraying gods and and anthropomorphism. I don't know if that invokes anything, but I just want to ask that question.
Yeah, I think the person is Xenophanes. Okay, he criticized Homer's, and he talked about
Xenophon.
Yeah, Xenophanes. Okay, I think I don't know how to Greg or Dan, do you know how to pronounce the name? Xenophanes, right?
Xenophanes.
Xenophanes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So let's move on. And I think
Can I make one comment here?
Okay, please.
I think there is pretty good evidence that Socrates did study with Archelaus, and Archelaus was arguably a student of Anaxagoras. And so there is a connection there when he was young. And we have this, that's a Diogenes Laertius, book 2, chapter 23. And it's pretty striking because it's from Ion of Chios, who is a contemporary. He actually died in the 420s, I think it was. So this is a very early report when Socrates is still alive, that he visited the island of Samos in the company of Archelaus when Socrates was young, presumably a student of Archelaus. So that's likely, but the Anaxagoras connection is very unlikely.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dan. And we have a lot of Greek experts. That's wonderful. Yeah. Okay, so let's start from Milesian school, and then basics Milesian school, and these three philosophers. Okay, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. Okay, they all know. I think they know each other because Thales is the teacher of Anaximander. Anaximander is the teacher of Anaximenes. Okay. So they know each other, and they all in the same city. And at that time, the city belonged to the kingdom of Lydia. So this one basics is quite a commercial success cities. So I believe people live a pretty good life, and so they lack of interest in mythology and to mythologically based cosmology. So it doesn't mean they don't believe God. They still have God. They still believe all the Greek Zeus, all this kind of God, but they don't use mythology to explain cosmology problem. So basically they use logos instead of mythos. So they have faith in reason, scientific thought. So basically they are science, and they believe the human reason is enough, is sufficient instrument for the research. And the one thing that is common is so-called arche or arche, right? Basically it's underlying principle or basic stuff. So basics, another way we can look at, they are more, I'm not sure this definition is scholastically correct or not, but basics, we can roughly say they are empiricists compared to the people from the Italian side, or we can call them material monism, because they all believe that something, okay, arcade, okay, underlying principle. So that's what they are looking for these philosophers. So the very first one we will introduce is Thales. Okay, so he probably the world's first philosopher, even older than Buddha in India or Confucius or Lao Tzu, okay, in China. So he probably the oldest philosopher. Okay, so he learned geometry in Egypt, and he simplified the explanation of nature phenomena. Okay, phenomena. So when we talk about arches, okay, so he said everything is from water. So water is the source of everything. So he also predict the solar eclipse, okay, on certain day. I'm not sure how he predicted, okay, but that's the legendary here. And then one famous thing is he make a lot of money, okay, by predict the harvest, olive harvest, okay, and then he prepare the olive press machine or something, and then he can rent it out, and so he make a lot of money, kind of just like George Soros, right? As a philosopher, you can also make money. So that's the interest part on that. And then he also a military strategist, right? During the war against, because they are belong to the kingdom of Lydia, and Persian Empire is a growing empire. So they war against Persian, and then he also have a strategy like digging the trench to diversion the upstream, so so you can pass over across the river. And then Cicero, I have to say, he assure water is the principle of all things, and that God is that mind which shape and create all things from water. Basically, they still believe God, but here I think we can interpret God as nature, okay, or they have the nature God concept. So that's the very first one, Thales. And then they have the Thales theorem. Okay, basically talking in the mathematics. If you have a circle and you have a diameter at any point around the circle, okay, if you draw a triangle, this triangle must be a right triangle. So I assume we probably all learned this before, and that's from him. So that's the first philosopher. Then we can deal with his student, Anaximander. Okay, and Anaximander is interesting. Okay, so when we talk about Archie, okay, he has something called Aparion. Okay, Aparion, right? Apparel, right? So basic, it means the boundless, infinite, and intermediate matter. We don't know what's that, but basically it's something thinner than water, but thicker than air. So that's the Archie, okay, the thing who construct everything. So more interested in is he has kind of evolutionary idea. 2000 before Darwin. Okay, so he talked about animal is spring out from the sea and long ago, and the bone and the trapped by the spiny bark, and then get older, then become the land animal, and this kind of change. Because he look at his logic is he look at the animal, look at the human especially. He noticed human is not the most powerful animal, but men can dominate all the animals. So he started to think about the species is not fixed. It has to go through some evolution. So he also noticed his idea of human evolution is different than most culture during that time. He thinking about the start from fish because all the animals start from fish, and the fish will evolve to shark because he noticed the shark have life form because their egg is inside the baby, inside the belly, and then the baby shark will born live. So he noticed shark, and then shark will move to the land and become land animal and become human. So that's his idea of species. So it seems very advanced, but unfortunately, no one pay attention after that. So more interesting is Anaximander's cosmology idea. So his idea is he talking about Earth. Earth is like a cylinder. So he also said the diameter is 3 times larger than the height. And the interesting part is his cosmology model has the 3 rings outside the Earth. Okay, it's like a tube. Okay, so each tube, inside the tube, they have a fire, and the tube they have a hole. Okay, so you will see on this tube, we call this one is the sun ring, right? So they have a fire inside, and they have a hole, and this ring will spin. So you will see the sun, go this way, and then this one is moon, and all the stars. They have many things. All the stars go this way, and the idea is the further away from Earth, it will spin faster. So the sun, this circle, this ring will spin once a day, and this one is once a month, and this one basically fixed. So that's his model of the universe. And he even has the distance calculated. So the Earth, the radius is 1. So the star, the distance is 9 times of Earth's diameter, okay, radius, and then moon is 18 times.
Only a cat-owning bitch would complain about a fucking joke. Fine, you're upset you lost your cat. Fair enough.
Okay. Okay. So
sorry guys. Yeah.
Did you remove him?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah.
I apologize.
Yes. All right. So basics, that's his model. And then when we look at this model, the one thing we notice is it's different than the other model. If you look at around the world, even like in Chinese, basically talk about the circle on the heaven and the square on the earth, right? Okay. And India, we're talking about the elephant carry the earth, and elephant stand on the big turtle. And the good thing is the Indian already noticed the earth is is curved, okay? It's not flat. And even for the later time, okay, in Plato's Timaeus, we talk about this kind of sphere, right? You have the earth center, then you have moon, sun, Mercury, all that. It's accurate, but basics is this model. And look at Anaximander's model is very different. And then the good thing is we can, of course, we have no reason to believe that's true, but we can see the advantage of his thought. First, he doesn't need the support for the earth. That's a very different thing. And then his reason is everything is in balance. If it's balanced, you don't need the support. So in his idea, you don't need like elephant or turtle to support the earth. And then for the rings circulate surrounding the earth, he also resolved the problem, to explain why the sun will not fall to the earth. Because we all know everything will fall down to the ground, but why sun and the moon will never fall down? So use this model, he can avoid to explain this kind of problem. So that's the Anaximander's idea of cosmology. So he's not only dealing with the science, he also deals with morals. So for example, he has, because everything is balance. So his idea of moral is justice. Justice means go balance, things return to the origins. So they have a point left here is when things have their origin, then also their destruction happen according to necessity, for they give to each other justice and the recompenses for their injustice in conformity with the ordinance of time. So that's his moral basis, talking about justice. And he even had drawn the map. He probably one of the early cartography. Okay? And he also have a so-called Greco-Roman of the sundial. He predict the earthquake and the weather. Here, of course, I will put a question mark. I'm not sure how he predict, according to the legend, he can predict the earthquake. So basics, Anaximander, we can say, is the early scientist, and then you can go through his theory, everything. There's no God involved, and then everything by his observation and have some model. Okay. So we will say he is a person who start to build the model to explain what's going on in this world. So the last one in the Milesian school is Anaximander. Anaximander is also a student. So same thing, because they belong to, in this time, they are thinking about arches. So air is his idea about the basic stuff, just like atom we talk about, the basic stuff of everything. So if we summarize, say this, we're talking about water. Anaximander talk about Aperion, and then arches. Anaximander is talking about air. So basically, he also have another advanced idea is, since everything is built, composed of air, so how can we have a different thing? So his idea is the condensation and the rarefaction, right? So basics, if you condense, they will become solid, condense the air, and so the quality change, okay, the quantity change, okay, will affect the quality. So everything will change. So he go back to different cosmology model. Basically, he talk about Earth is flat, and everything, the entire Earth is float on the air, and the star and the sun and the moon are all flat disk and on the sky. So that's his cosmology model. So so here we just briefly talk about these Milesian schools, and then we will easily to summarize. They all scientists, and the basics, they are material monism. They use one thing, arches, to express everything, and then that's they are doing. And we were fairly to call them the first group of philosophers in the Western world. Yeah. So Dan, please.
Very nice presentation, very clear and helpful. I'm going to throw a monkey wrench in, because I have been arguing for a number of years that this material monism stuff is wrong. It has a good pedigree. It comes from Aristotle, but I think it's still wrong. And
Excuse me, you say still wrong means
It's wrong. I think the theory that they were material monists is wrong. I think it's hard to tell with Thales because we don't have any writings of his. With Anaximander, actually, Aristotle flip-flops between calling him a material monist and calling him a pluralist, and with good reason, because he tells you that the things turn into each other. And with Anaximenes, although unfortunately we don't have any long quotations from him, fragments from him, we do have some fairly good reports of what he said. And what he says is that air turns into other things. So air, when it's rarefied, turns into fire. When it's condensed, it turns into wind, and then cloud, and then water and earth and stones. So the more dense it gets, the more it changes its character. But he uses, at least the description says that it comes to be gignitae, it changes, something changes into something else. And as far as I can see, what he's really saying is that air is the basic form. It's kind of the default form of matter, but it's not the only form of matter. It changes its character and turns into other things, and it's not identical with them when it changes into them. And then it changes back. It goes one way and then the other. It gets denser and then it gets thinner and so forth. But in all of that, I don't think there's any evidence that he is a material monist. The arche here in this time just means a starting point. It doesn't necessarily mean underlying reality. And you get arche meaning something like that in Plato's Phaedrus, but not before that. Not before that does arche get this sort of loaded meaning. It's the starting point. The first state of matter was air, and then it turned into other things, and then it turned back into air again, and so forth. So again, I know that that's a controversial point, but I can say that a lot of people are very dubious now about the material monism claim. And let me just add one more thing. You can't even explain how material monism works until Parmenides comes along, because you have to have a concept of an essence. When you say water, when you say, this looks like wood, my table looks like it's made out of wood, but wood is really water, you have to be able to distinguish between an accidental appearance and an essential property. It's still really water. It just looks like wood. It just, the appearances change, but the essence stays the same. There's no word for essence. There's no concept of essence before Parmenides. And so I don't think they could even express that idea, much less entertain it seriously. So anyway, I won't belabor that, but I do want to point out it's very problematic that they were material monists.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dan. Yeah, I know you have a solid background, so I think that's correct. Yeah, but so let me rephrase while you talk. So basics, material monism is a wrong name being labeled probably by Aristotle.
Yeah, there is one material monist, but it's Diogenes of Apollonia, but he's writing in the next century, not in the 6th century, he's in the 5th century BC.
So let me ask you one question. When they talk about arche, okay, water or air, so they are not talking about symbolic, right? They are talking about the real things.
They're talking about, again, the starting point of the universe. There's a kind
starting point, okay.
A kind of, again, default state of matter. And if you do something to it, it turns into other things, but it doesn't mean it's the only state of matter.
So does arche means in Greek means a starting point, or
Yeah,
mean
that's right.
Or substratum? I think a lot of places they talk about it's a substratum.
Yeah, well, they do, again, starting with Plato's Phaedrus, you can find the passage in Plato's Phaedrus where he makes those kind of extravagant claims about what arche represents. But you don't find that before Plato. And as far as you can tell, arche just means the starting point of something, the first state of the way things were. And then it changes into other things and changes back, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the only thing. It's not the only kind of matter in town.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, basics. I think that's okay. We have another hands up, right? Edward, please.
Dan, that was very helpful. But we do credit Thales and Anaximander with being among the first philosophers. And I wonder if we can say that the reason they were distinct from other thinkers is that they believed in or searched for an unseen reality that ordinary people weren't dealing with. In other words, in Thales' case, he said water, Anaximander, Pyrrhon. But that is a difference that separated them from ordinary thinkers, or even maybe the beginning of some kind of physics, some kind of looking for things that aren't apparent as being ultimately real. Do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, it's a good point, but the one thing, I guess the thing I worry about is claiming that I don't see Thales saying that water is really there when you don't see it. Maybe he believed that, but we have no evidence for that view. To me, the most important thing is not the hiddenness of it. It's the fact that the explanation is going from, lightning is caused by Zeus throwing thunderbolts kind of thing. He gets mad at somebody and he throws thunderbolts. Instead of explaining it that way, you say that that lightning is fire in the clouds. And so the big transition to me is not from hidden from evident to hidden. It's from, if you will, from mythological to naturalistic explanations. And you say, here is, Thales, for instance, says the earth is like a raft floating on a vast sea. And when the waves get stirred up, it shakes the ground, and that's what we call an earthquake. Well, instead of saying Poseidon, the earth shaker, has caused this, the sea god has caused earthquakes, what he says is there was a natural wind on the surface of the water. It caused this to happen. And so instead of looking for a mythological and, if you will, theological answer to the question, we look for a naturalistic one. And then they have competing, at some point they get competing naturalistic answers, but they're all naturalistic. And that's the striking thing about them. They're all, it's like this everyday event we see every day, like water getting blown into waves by wind. That's what causes this event of the earthquake too. So we're comparing mysterious, scary events in nature to familiar events in nature, and saying this makes sense without calling in the gods to explain what happened.
Yes, I can see moving away from the theological or religious or mythological. But what about Anaximander thinking there's some kind of undifferentiated substratum? Wasn't that radically new?
Again, I'm going to say what substratum. What he says is the implication seems to be that there's some kind of, undifferentiated matter, and it gradually gets differentiated into other things. But I don't see any evidence that he thinks that apeiron is surrounding us. It's not like we're breathing apeiron in. It's like apeiron is way out at the edge of the universe, and the part of universe we're in, it's differentiated itself into fire and water and earth and air and all these things. And so I don't think he's yet got the idea of substratum.
Okay, fine.
But it's possible.
Great. Thank you very much for the discussion. And then we have Tracy, please.
Yeah, are there any physicists here or experts that can talk about how maybe an Anaximander's view has connections to dark matter?
I think probably too far away, right? So I think
I think Jason has his hand up. I don't know if there's any physicists, but Jason has his
Jason,
hand
yeah,
up.
Jason, please. Jason
Well,
Benton.
I actually do know a lot about physics. Well, anyways, I don't know about dark matter in terms of their philosophy, but the Greeks were, I guess, influenced by the Arabs and others further east in terms of science and understanding. Is there any evidence of this?
Anybody want to answer this question? I think here we are talking about pre-Socratic, right? So that's my understanding. The Greek, let's put the Athenians, okay? Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They are being influenced from two sides. One is on the, let's make it very simple, on the their east side, which is Asia Minor. They are more scientific. And another influence on their west side is Italian, Sicily. They are more mysticism. Okay, so I think that's the influence of them. So that's the only thing I can say so far. Tracy, please.
Yes, I know Sri Aurobindo, if that's how you say his name, who wrote a bit about Heraclitus, really strongly believed that he had been to India.
Okay.
And related, some of his philosophy to some of the beliefs from India at that time.
I'm not sure, Indian during this time, but
well, just a belief that he had, yeah.
Well, we do see a lot of similar, right? When we talk about Plato's writing, okay, they all believe reincarnation, and same as the Indian, samsara, okay. So
and we know Herodotus ventured on the edges of India.
I don't know, anybody know?
Yeah, I teach Herodotus.
I do think that, well, I don't know about the Greeks, but Aristotle and Plato were aware of the Babylonians and the Arabs, especially in mathematics. But yeah, I don't know if all the Greeks, I don't want to generalize that.
Okay, so let's move on. We will have a chance to discuss. And then during I think they have a big event happened during the 546 BC. There's a Persian Empire, and that's the King Cyrus who emancipate the exiled Jews, right? If you're familiar with the Bible story. And before that time, and he conquered Lydia. So I also noticed the philosophy in Ionian change after this time, because they are not that focused on science anymore. That's just my observation. So I put this one in the here. So after this thing happened, it looked like the philosophy being changed. That's just my opinion, and I don't know, and probably, I don't know, Greg or Dan, you have something to say about this war?
What's that?
Nothing to say about this war, the Persian
War. Well,
you're talking about the Persian and Lydian War, right?
Yeah, Persian and the Lydian,
Yeah. That's once Cyrus started to expand, he fought with Croesus, and of course he won, and he took Sardis. There is an anecdote that Croesus, when they were looting the city, Croesus and Cyrus came into the palace. Croesus is sitting there, and he said, what are your soldiers doing there, Cyrus? And Cyrus said, they're looting your city. He said, no, they're looting your city. So he supposedly liked this, and he I mean, that's one of the reasons. And he left him as a governor for a while to continue, but yeah, that's, Cyrus the Great. He, started this empire. So I don't know, Greeks certainly, knew about Mesopotamia, because they travel here, maybe a little bit about India. I know somebody said Arabs. I don't think Arabs constituted anything at the time. They haven't yet developed in a serious culture, I think. But I don't know what else to say. But I definitely, we know that once the Ionia became part of the Persian Empire, the conflict started because of the Ionian revolt, and specifically, Miletus and Athens supported this because they're considered to be Ionians as well. And that led to the Greco-Persian Wars. But that was already later. But when the Persian Empire pretty much expanded everywhere, son of Cyrus, Cambyses conquered Egypt, and then Darius took over. Darius kind of very decently related, supposedly, maybe even not related to Cyrus, but he really started a new dynasty.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah. So we have Edward, please.
Yes, I think it's very important to have this as a background to help understand. Whitehead also talked about the different epochs, that is, the surrounding cultures for the development of different eras of philosophy. So I think, Jason, you're wise to bring this to our attention. And isn't it true that Thales and Anaximander were engineers, Milesian engineers, that helped Cyrus with military adventures? There was a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, that Thales was commanded to help the Cyrus's army ford a river, and he came up with the idea, instead of building a bridge or pontoons, he simply cut the river in half so that they could cross on dry land. I mean, there are other stories about Thales predicting an eclipse and cornering the olive press market and so on. Of course, you don't know how much of it is true, but weren't they in assisting Cyrus in terms of their engineering skills? That's what I've heard.
Is he helping Cyrus, or he is fighting against Cyrus?
Yes, helping Croesus against Cyrus.
Croesus, yes, Croesus.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Croesus.
because at that time is belonged to Lydia, right?
Can I've actually written an article about this claim, and I think it's false. Not for engineering reasons, but for political reasons.
Yeah.
Just very briefly, one of the things that it has pretty good authority is that Thales, Thales advised the Ionian Greek states not to get involved with Lydia, to keep their independence. And most of them ended up helping Lydia, but Miletus did not. And this is a fact. This is a historical fact. All the other cities of Ionia then became, when Cyrus defeated King Croesus of Lydia, they became essentially subject states of the Persian Empire. But Miletus did not. It was treated and given a treaty of equality with this vast Persian Empire. They treated them as decently. Why? Because they had not revolted. They had not helped the Lydians and fought against the Persians. And that's well documented. And I think had Thales actually helped them win a big victory against the Persian army, the Persians would have known about it, and they would never have treated Miletus decently. So I think that piece of historical evidence counts against that particular story.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. That's very.
By the way, one little detail: the eclipse that Thales predicted in the 585. There is an interesting story about it because it happened during the battle between Lydians and Medians. I mean, it was before Persian Empire, obviously, and supposedly it's stopped and it was taken as an omen, and they made a treaty, because it's happened during the battle, and they made a treaty, and at that time the king of Medes, Cyaxares, married the Lydian princess, and eventually he is the ancestor of Cyrus. His great grandfather, because Astyages was his son, and this is the grandfather of, with all those stories from Herodotus, grandfather of Cyrus.
Well, thank you, everyone. That's great information. And the one thing I just recall, Thales is one of the 7 sages, right? When in the Plato keep talking about 7 sages, and this Thales is one of that. So, okay, so let's move on to another. So we finished for the Milesians. Okay, so that's the 3 philosophers we talked about. Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. They are 3 philosophers. It belong to the Milesian schools. And after the Persian Empire occupied or conquered Lydia, and then I can tell the philosophy start to change. And then one person we like to talk about today, and probably also next week, is Pythagoras. And Pythagoras is actually was from this area, Samos. Okay, you can see here, Samos on this side, and the Milesian is on this area, and the Milesian is here, and so it's an island. So when he was 40 years old, he moved to this place, Croton here, and for what reason? People said because he's religious and he wanted to set up his court. So Pythagoras is not only a mathematician or geometry, he also do the music theory and the basics in Croton. He set up his school of Pythagoreanism. Okay, so they have many things. They are just like a religious cult. They are vegetarian. They believe the immortality of soul. They believe the incarnation, and they don't eat beans, and many things. And then, so that's why, he kind of like a split, so at the on the mathematics science part, he belonged to Asia Minor, but later on he become more mysticism. Okay, so he has to move to Croton in this area and set up his court. And Bertrand Russell has a very interesting comment on that. In his history of the Western philosophy, he wrote the most important man that Pythagoras, the most important man that ever lived, both when he was wise and when he was unwise. Okay. He talked about mathematics in the sense of demonstrative deductive argument begin with him. He talked about his Pythagorean theory and its proof. And in his intimately connected with peculiar form of mysticism. Okay. And he has an interesting comment on, he is the combination of Einstein and Mrs. Eddy. I think he's talking about Mary Baker Eddy. Okay. So he talked about that. That's Bertrand Russell's comment. Okay. And I think that's interesting to share. And then just quickly share, I think we all know this Pythagorean rule, and then he also, in today's Western music theory, we all say that's the Pythagorean music theory. And then I'm not very clear how does it work. I just show the chart. But in Plato's dialogue, I think it's timeous and has a much, they have this 2 serial number and further on, being developed for the today's music theory. So that's Pythagoras. Okay.
I think in the Meno, I'm sorry to interrupt, Jason. In the Meno,
go ahead.
when Socrates is trying to prove the theory of recollection, knowledge by recollection, when he inspects the slave boy and asks him about the hypotenuse, and I think that's part of the theory of Pythagoras. In Plato's Meno,
Oh yeah,
Socrates, claims that knowledge is recollection, and he says the slave boy has information about the rectangle and squaring. So I think that's related to Pythagorean theory. But anyway, I just wanted to comment.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else? Anybody want to comment anything before we move to another philosopher, Xenophanes? Okay. No?
Actually, Jason, there's a comment in the chat. Tracy Stephen says, anybody know will this be on YouTube later? If so, where? I don't know the answer to that. It's in the chat on Zoom.
What YouTube?
Will this recording, will it be on YouTube?
Oh yeah. We'll put it in the YouTube. Okay. Actually, when you go to the sign up page, if you move further down, I will show you later. Okay. When you go to move further down, and then you will see our YouTube channel and past events. So you click that one, will come with a spreadsheet, and then the PowerPoint and the YouTube will be there. So I will show you, for the last part of today. Okay. So if you don't know, so it's there. Okay. Thank you for. And the one thing I'd like to use, I have no time and I cannot read the chat. Okay, during the presentation. So you'd better raise your hand. That'll be better. And sometimes they have issue and just type in the chat. So I don't know until we finish the presentation. So Tracy, please.
Yeah. Yes, I thought the primary topic this evening was to be Heraclitus, which was what most of the reading was.
Yeah, we will do the Heraclitus. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will leave at least 20 minutes for the Heraclitus. Okay, so Xenophanes. Okay, so that's another philosopher, and he's from Ionian side. And easy way to talk about him is we can say he is. Well, that's my word. I can call him a religious reformer. So basically, and then we don't know exactly. Somebody may know better, but I know he probably died in Syracuse in Sicily, Italy. Okay, and he probably traveled around, and then he also badmouthed. He criticized Homer and Hesiod, and he is. I think we at the beginning of today we talked about he criticized. He talked about God. Okay, so he talked about the cat. That's his word. If cattle and horses or lion has hands and they were able to draw with their feet and produce a work with man, the horse will draw the form of gods like horse, cattle, and cattle like cattle, lion like lion, and they will make the god's body the same shape as their own. So that's a famous his theory about God. So he has the concept of one God, greatest among gods and the man. There's abstract, universal, unchanging, immobile, and always present. So that's his concept of God, and we can consider that's kind of advanced. And he started to think about the archery, right? And he is talking about we will consider him as the first philosopher to separate knowledge and the belief. He kind of think about they are different. And another contribution he has is he is being considered as the founder of the skepticism, both by the later philosopher in India, okay, and Pyrrho. okay, Pyrrhonist. Okay, and then when we talk about Indian, I think at the beginning people talk about Indian. Pyrrho is the person. He traveled with Alexander the Great, which is later, okay, in the 330 BC, 200 years later, and he has been in India, and that's why I think that's the first solid evidence, and between Greek word and the Indian have a connection. That's from the Alexander the Great, and Pyrrho is the one who contact. He go with Alexander and visit India. So
you know, I think also Callisthenes, who was like a relative of Aristotle, he went with Alexander also, right? He was the kind of a historian. He wrote everything, even though Alexander executed him. But that's he passed some information as well, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then before we move to Heraclitus, okay, anything want to add on? And I think there's someone concerned about Heraclitus. I think Heraclitus is a big thing, and then we probably will consider Heraclitus is a real philosopher, right? Before this, all the philosophers, you probably will consider they are mathematician, they are scientists, or they just religious reformer. But Heraclitus, probably the first one we can consider as a real philosopher. Okay. So that's we will. I try to make the summary on this one, but I find out that the best way to understand Heraclitus is to read his phrases, because he probably the only one for today have some verses that, and sometimes it's a fragment, and then it's, so if we read the translation, it's very different because, and the order is very different. So it's a little bit challenging, but we can go to read together. And if you already read, and welcome to raise your hand to share what you are thinking. And basically, let me quick make some summary on Heraclitus. Okay, so he will consider philosopher of riddles because he writes something paradoxy. Okay, paradox philosophy. Okay, and he mentioned about logos, and then he's becoming his doctrine of perpetual flux, and he talk about fire. When we talk about archery, his idea is fire, everything from fire. And again, I think Dan will probably disagree on this idea, but I think his fire as a archery could be different than Thales water, because when Heraclitus talk about fire, he probably talk about the symbolic fire, not the material fire. That's my understanding, but I don't know. If you have different opinion, and welcome to share. So, any question, any comment? And then otherwise, I will spend another probably 10, 15, 20 minutes. Let's go through some of Heraclitus verses. Okay. So I think that would be easy way to understand, and not all of them can explain, or I'm not expert on this. And I remember one day there's one in, I think it's the Toronto philosophy group. They are reading Heraclitus, okay, and then verses by verses. So what they are doing is each Saturday they read about 4 or 5 verses, and everybody share, what you learn from this. That's an interesting exercise, and I joined them for a few weeks. I think that's pretty good, So I think that we put in a few parts, as I separate them for six different parts. So let's go through one of everyone. So first part that he talked about is logos. All right, so on the very first verses, that's important. Lo, this logos is true evermore, yet men are as unable to understand it when they hear it for the first time as before they have heard it at all. So the first part he talked about logos, okay, and that's his important part. And then, is anyone have anything want to talk about on these verses, or you have your own verses you want to share? Okay. On the first few. And the number 4 is interesting. Those who seek gold dig up much earth and find a little. So basically, when you dig earth, most you find is try to dig gold, but turn out you find out much more earth and just a little bit gold. That's my explanation. But, you know,
Jason, was it him who said that you can't step into this water, into the same water twice?
Yes, we're going to read next one.
Oh, it's going to be later.
Okay, so the second part, that's the most famous part. You cannot step twice into the same river, for fresh water are ever flowing up you. So that's his famous verses. And then that's the thing we have. Okay, so the interesting, I don't know how many people familiar with the Asian philosophy. If you know the very famous Taoism writer, Lao Tzu, and he wrote Dao De Jing. It's an 81 chapter. Each one is just like verses. So when you read it, it's strange, it doesn't make sense. But you think through and they probably give you some lesson. So that's my view of reading Heraclitus. I sometimes call him is the Western Taoism. Okay. So another one is talk about cold things, like this one is a perfect example. Cold things become warm, and what is warm cools, and what is wet dried, and what parched is moisture. So we talk about things change. So you can see his idea. And next week, when we talk about Parmenides, we will see the contrast between these two philosophers. And then, so we probably will bring back Heraclitus next week, because in my point of view, Parmenides is totally opposite from Heraclitus. And he talk about, everything he talk about change. And the Parmenides on the Italian side, and he is talking about being, nothing change. Okay. So this one also interesting. He talk about time is a child playing game of Job. I think Job is their ancient game, like chess. And the kingship is in the hand of a child. A little bit satire. And another thing he like to talk about is war. Okay. So he talk about war is the father of all and the king of all. And some he has made gods and some made men, and some bound and some free. So some people explain, would like to say, okay, Heraclitus is, how do you say it is a fascism. Okay, because he talk about war, he like to war. But that's my idea. I don't think he is talking about the actual war. I think the war here, he talk about the fighting, the contract. So all the solution or the knowledge is from war, and through the contrast, the conflicts will bring the solution, making progress. That's my understanding. Because he also said, we must know that war is common to all. Strife is justice. Okay, remember, because strife is justice, and that all things come into being and pass away through strife. Okay, so he talked about this kind of the struggle, power struggle is the way to bring justice and making progress. It's the father of all things, and it's the king of all things. That's my understanding. But I do read some article talking about Heraclitus is supporting war. The authors read the war is a real war. Okay. So that's really up to you how you're going to read it.
Could I dispute the first translation?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, please. Yeah, I know that. I even see many different translations, and sometimes I have no clue. please. Yeah.
I put it in the chat.
Okay.
The Greek.
Okay. You want to read it?
I'll read it in Greek, but
Okay, please.
just to comment.
Okay.
This is a real fragment of Parmenides. Potamoisi toisenau toisenem bainusen, heterakai heterahudatai pire. Now, this is Heraclitus at his best, because what you got is there are 9 words in Greek, and they say a whole lot more than any translation can capture. But I just want to point out, it does not say you cannot step twice into the same river. That's Plato's interpretation and Aristotle's interpretation, but they both happen to be wrong. And you can see they're wrong by paying attention to his language. And
so, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, because the first words, potamoisen, toisenau, toisenem, bainusen. Notice they all rhyme. They're all in the dative plural form. And toisenau, toisen, the second and third words, that means the same. And it's ambiguous whether it modifies rivers, the first word, potamoisi, or the last word, embainusen, those stepping in. But it makes sense either way. And so it says, on those, this is my translation, on those stepping into rivers staying the same, other and other waters flow. The rivers stay the same. The waters flow. Now just think about it. What would happen if the river stopped flowing? If the water stopped flowing? No river, right? There'd be a dry stream bed, or maybe a lake, or something like that.
Like a stagnant pond.
There would be no river there. And this is, so there's actually a causal interpretation here. And it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, and just, again, let me point out before I forget to do so, he creates the sound of the river in the first four words. Potamoisi, toisenau, toisenem, bainusen. You hear the bubbling of the river as it's poetry. It's not in verse form, but it's like poetry. And then he says, the rivers stay the same, but the waters are always changing. Now, but the same can apply not only to the rivers, but to those stepping in, embainusen. And so what it says there is, to the same people stepping into the rivers, other and other waters flow. Okay? And my English is ambiguous, roughly in the way that Heraclitus' Greek is ambiguous. So what he's saying is that, as different waters flow on you, you stay the same. What does it mean? Well, my guess is, the point is that by the fact that you cross the rivers, and by the way, there were almost no bridges in ancient Greece. You had to get across the river. You had to walk. The Romans were great bridge builders, but the Greeks were not. So you get to a river, you have to ford it at a shallow place. Anyway, the fact that you got across means that you resisted the flow of the river. You didn't get carried away with the river. You are asserting your own reality by resisting the river in there. And so it's incredible. It's an incredible sentence. First four words rhyme. The last 5 words are an alliteration. It's slow and involved at first, and then it speeds up at the end. It's just music. And 9 words, and he says all that. He has 2 messages in there, but they kind of support each other. The message is, the more the rivers change, the more the waters change, the more the rivers stay the same. And so do you, if you get across the river. That's incredible, but it also contradicts every other so-called river fragment. That's the only river fragment. All the others are cheap imitations they're paraphrases that don't have this kind of poetic richness to it. And they actually contradict what he's saying there. So the point is, the more things change, the more they, at a low level, the more they stay the same at a higher level. And I would also let me cite fragment 30 for you too. and one of his most famous, you might have this later on, this world order, this cosmos, the same of all, no God nor man did create, but it ever is and was and will be, ever living fire, kindling in measures and being quenched in measures. Okay. So what he's saying, the whole world stays the same. It has never created. This is a more static universe than any of the Milesians have. This world wasn't created. It will not be destroyed. It will always be there. Why? Because it's always changing, but always staying the same. There's this kind of balanced change. A turns into B, turns into C, turns into B, turns into A. It's always, the transformations retain this balance, and that's the logos at work, to keep everything the same, even though it's changing. So it's really an incredible theory, but it's so much more profound than what you get from Plato and Aristotle. It's really sad that they didn't get it. But that's what he said. He said, I'm going to tell you how this works, and you're not going to understand. And it's not till the 20th century, I think, that at least some people figured out what he was really saying.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, Madeline, please.
Yes, thanks, Jason. Well, of course, I've always liked this one. I think the way that I have looked at it in the past has been that the changing elements are not just the rivers, but the person or people. And so the only consistency in this is the actual action of stepping. And that really fits in very well with what seems to be Heraclitus's worldview as the world is a verb, basically.
Thank you, Madeline. Yeah, Tracy, please.
My focus, I teach Greek literature and the Greeks in community ed. My focus is always making all of this relevant to the ordinary person today. And one of the things I tend to bring up with this whole point that's so meaningful to me has to do with the whole movement of language called E prime. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It started in 1965. And it's basically about how our language that uses the verb to be all the time is out of step with reality. And writers in E prime avoid ever using the verb to be, because the basic attitude is we have a consistent sense of self, but it is always becoming. And for example, if you say Jason is lazy or Cindy is lazy, you're fixing this particular person in time rather than as a flow, like saying he has been lazy in the past. There's actually a whole book out on how grammar, our use of grammar, can be destructive to ourselves psychologically in regard to fixing us when indeed we are a moving entity, even though we have a basic stable sense of self. So I find that to be a tremendously meaningful connection to Heraclitus.
Thank you. Edward, please.
Dan, that was a very scholarly and beautiful explanation of that very important line. I want to, because I too thought we were going to be doing the Heraclitus fragments, I went to the link, Jason, that you gave us, and I'd like, Dan, if you would, the very first fragment. I went through this slowly. What does he mean by logos? It's the second word in the very first fragment.
So Dan, you want to explain?
Yes.
I think he used the word the logos, right?
Yes. So that's my question. I don't know if Dan could hear my question.
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah. Well,
the very first one, the very first verb.
I mean, yeah, it just going to say, I mean, logos, if you're in the unabridged Greek dictionary, the Liddell Scott Jones, it takes up, almost 2 pages, incredibly long and complicated. But I think the point here is what's he doing with logos? And I do think, I mean, it's going to be hard to translate in a certain sense. But the point here, I think logos comes to mean reason, but not this early. So reason is probably a bit of an over translation here. But I think, it's a message, if you will. And some people like to translate, Charles Kahn and some others, translate something like account, but that makes it sound like he's an accountant and he's, doing accounts receivable and stuff, and I don't like that. But I just translated as word, although in my translation, the text of early Greek philosophy, but word, if you translate it as word, you have to understand it not to mean a single word like what we call a lexeme. Logos never means that in Greek. It always means a string of words, a communication, a message. And so this is a message in a certain way, but it's also one word meaning of logos is a proportion. And a lot of his account is how the world is constructed of proportions of his 3 basic elements are fire, water, and earth, and they turn into each other. And they turn into each other according to the same measures all the time. So there's the same ratio of water, say fire to water as water to fire, and the same ratio of water to earth and so on. There's a constant ratio going on there. And so he wants you to see there's a balance of forces going on and a kind of reciprocity of processes, so that some water is evaporating and some of it is precipitating out somewhere else. And the same amount of water is always there, but the same stuff isn't always water. Turns into fire, it turns into earth.
I see. So you wouldn't say that for him, logos is an arche? That would be inappropriate or not?
He does say in fragment 30, he does identify fire as the world is an ever-living fire, quenching in measures and going out in measures. He does say that, but I don't think he can be taken to mean that everything is fire. He just says in measures, it appears at times as fire and turning into other things, etc. But the one thing I would just, let me get one more point in here. He expressly says in 2 fragments that the death, let's say the birth of fire is the death of water, and vice versa, and so on. And so when one thing dies to produce the next element in the series, that means they are not identical. This is the death of one is the birth of another. So he's certainly not a material monist. Whatever you may say of anybody else, explicitly he denies saying that fire, water, and earth are the same thing, because one of them has to die to produce the other one.
And specifically, the other is the opposite, right?
Yeah, they are effectively opposites, have opposite traits.
Can I ask you about one other quote? Next to the river quote, there's the very next one, 21. I don't know if you have that, Jason.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's also about stepping in the river. Did you want to comment on comparing that to 20 or not? Dan?
Probably, just show it to me, but it's probably one of those paraphrases that's not, it gets taken as a fragment when it just has no.
You're talking about 21?
21. Patamoy Gar Udestin. See it?
No, this is the PDF.
Yeah, I'm using PDF.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
okay.
one. I converted it to PDF. So
Yeah, that's one of
that's
these.
the one. Yeah.
Yeah. fragment 91. Yeah, that's again, I take that, and a lot of, again, this isn't me only. There's been quite a few scholars who have rejected the Jeffrey Kirk and Miroslav, say what's the name? Anyway, that reject those fragments as not fragments. They're just paraphrases of fragment 12, and not very good paraphrases at that. So, yeah. So,
Okay.
Okay, so well, we have running out of time, but anyway, thank you very much, especially to Dan, and then we learned a lot actually. Thank you very much. And then I think that I will finish today, and then next week we will continue on the. Let me just 1 minute. Check if you. Okay, next week we will continue on the. I think we probably were doing the based on our schedule. We will continue on the idiotic school on that side, and the only philosopher we not cover is Anaxagoras, who is important, and so. Next week, we will cover from here. Okay, Heraclitus, and we already talked today, and we probably will have time to talk a little bit because it would be very good to compare Parmenides with Heraclitus. And Anaxagoras is kind of respond to what Parmenides said. Okay, so they are all related, and we can call they are contemporary. Okay, with Socrates' time. Okay. So, and then we will do Empedocles, okay, which is also another philosophers who talk about the four elements. So we will finish next week on the pre-Socratic philosopher. Then we will move to Democritus and Epicurus, which is contemporary, of actually 20 years older than Socrates, I think, during that time. So they are totally different than Socrates' philosophy, who is, they are materialist. Okay, I don't know if it's proper to call materialist or call it a realist compared to Plato as idealist. So that's our plan, and thank you everyone. And if you give me a few minutes, then I'd like to show you, somebody say like how to find the one in YouTube. Can you see the screen now? Okay, so if you go to every sign up page, okay, if you going down, okay, you will see video and the files, okay, on Greco-Roman philosophy, and you click, you will see this spreadsheet, and you can click YouTube and the PowerPoint. And usually I will post it in about 2-3 days after the meeting. And then anyway, thank you very much for today's, and thank you Dan, Greg, and everyone, and provide information and thank you very much for keep we safe for today. And thank you to join us, and I hope see you next week, 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock in New York time. So see you next week. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a
Bye, everybody.
Jason, thank you.